little thing I've been mulling over for a while, and then recently been kind of getting more into the whole concept of it, is exactly how powerful some of the characters are right now in the series. Once we started to really kind of get going into 100 Years Quest, you know, getting into like Alderaan, I'd say like with Mercphobia, we just got a little bit of what he was, you know, what he was capable of, like with lifting the ocean nearby and then just raising it to the sky. Obviously, Alderaan just being Alderaan relatively any of the time. And then it got really wild when Selene did the whole portion of, you know, creating this massive upshift in power in Elantir and in Earthland by making the moon so much larger. And because Suzaku beat the human version of Selene, which isn't obviously her at full power, it would mean that anyone that is equal to or relatively around Suzaku, you know, or above Suzaku's level is going to be as powerful, you know, as that version of Selene. But then there's obviously the, well, then how powerful are the Dragon Gods in full if that's only what human form Selene is capable of? And obviously we saw like Suzaku, when Sirius like actually pissed off Selene, like Suzaku wasn't even able to see her move. So it's like when you really think about like the craziness of speed that would take, when the craziness of speed it already took in order for him to do that to Urza, and it was based not to, but still obviously like really crazy of what he was just getting to the point where, well, Urza saw him a bit, but obviously not the full extent. But it was just obviously it was not one of those fights where they were really can tell what was going on. But when you look at probably I would say the best example right now to kind of bridge the gaps between the areas, because like I said, with human form Selene, like she just like passively it like has a feat where she just makes the moon the size of a large planet, and that's just her just getting serious and getting pissed off. So if that's where people are going up, it's still like, it's obviously like, okay, well, we have a general level where the people are, but we don't really know where the peak is and where the ceiling is. Like say like Acnologia, like overall was still left very vague, because it was like he seemed to be a threat to the planet without really trying, and then with eating the space between time, he essentially was like a threat to reality. But when it comes to, like I said, the best rather example right now is to look at Wed. Because when Wed fought Urza the first time, Urza used her arm to her fairy armor and her heavenly enchant onto her sword, and used her fairy shoot, oh god, I'm gonna end up like messing up the exact name like order. Fairy sword shooting star technique that she used to beat Misaki. Misaki is somebody who is relative to Suzaku, so Misaki would be capable of defeating human form Selene, as we you know, can. Haku would be the only strange one. We haven't really actually seen him in a full like straight fight. He just obviously clearly wasn't super serious with Wendy. One day, maybe whenever we get back to the Wendy fight, maybe they'll team up. I was wondering at some point if we were gonna get that. But Wed took that attack and blocked Urza's sword relatively fine. So clearly he's already a chunk above where Urza was at, even after her defeating with after she defeated Misaki. But the craziness of that, of obviously like he just took this attack that defeated somebody that, you know, is large planetary levels and stats, and then he goes through the dragonization process, which I assume relatively, I don't think that this is a translation difference. I think that this is just a wording difference. Is that if you're using Dragon Force, you're already that type of Dragon Slayer, so you are becoming that dragon. Same thing with obviously like, you know, well, Dragon Eaters, obviously it's just a varied Dragon Slayer generation, but it's still relatively down in the same kind of ideas. Whereas I think instead of and they called that Dragonification when they talked about it earlier, I think Dragonization is essentially you take somebody who isn't a Dragon Slayer and you just straight dragon them. So you aren't becoming a dragon through the means of a magic that turns you into a dragon, you're just turned into a dragon, and it enhances the magic and stuff that you already have, whatever abilities you already have set up in your arsenal. They are now dragon enhanced. It's a little different. It'd be like if we saw Cobra go into a full dragon form, his hearing magic would get enhanced. But like, it's the idea if he said, I don't want this dragon slaying magic anymore, threw it away, only did hearing magic, but became a dragon anyway. It's a strange thing. But Wed ended up taking that, and then, like I said, out of that attack, and now he's gone through the dragonization effect. He should be now, I would assume this thing is around-ish areas for Dragon Force. So this should be like hundreds of times stronger. And he was already stronger than Urza by, I would say, a good amount. Like, because here's the thing. Suzaku, I think, in the, like, against Urza, if they had a rematch, I think he still has speed on her. But I think Urza would be able to handle herself a lot better than the first time she fought him. And on top of that, I think it, like, if it came down to it, if Urza took his Dark Flame Slash, I don't think, like, very slim chance Urza would be able to take it without being defeated. And then I think vice versa, Suzaku with Urza's Fairy Sword attack. So, well, actually, I gotta say Shooting Star, because she might have another Fairy Sword and another technique, so I don't want to get future damaged by that. But with Wed just decided, it's like, no, block, and then he doesn't seem really impressed by the power, because like there's a point where she's enchanting it and it's like exclamation mark just on him, and it's like, oh, some form of surprise. But when he blocks it, he compliments Urza on her speed, because when obviously she's shooting at it with like meteor increased speed, but he's just like, he doesn't seem bothered by the power at all, and then just immediately goes in for an attack. So then when you look at like where he's at now, the idea of if he's hundreds of times stronger than where he was in the previous point in time, even if you say dozens, even if he said just like 50 times stronger, if he was already stronger than somebody who, you know, he relatively shrugged off a large planet level attack, and now he's, you know, I would say just similar to Dragon Force, hundreds. So if you say like 50 to 100 or 200 or whatever, 300, somewhere within that like 50 to a couple hundred, maybe like, I don't know where that would reasonably stop, just like 5 or 6, I don't know, because it's several, so I think it's like 3 or 4 or 5, I don't know numbers. But either way, it's a pretty wild jump. It's a pretty wild jump, but it does kind of bridge that gap between the human forms of the dragon gods and the actual full forms. I still think Igni is going to be different, because I think he trains in his human form, whereas Selene just kind of entertained herself in her human form, and then doesn't seem to, like, it seems like she had her abilities and then she would go into her human form and still be able to use them, whereas my guess is Ignia does stuff in his human form that Selene isn't, like Selene didn't really have the time for. But with that, it's just a very interesting kind of when you really think about it, when you look at like where he was at already, because I was hoping Urza and him would have another fight before he got dragon buffed, but he's already dragon buffed now, and I still don't think that this is going to be their full stages, like how him and Brian are. I still think that they're going to be able to go into a full dragon form, so who knows where he's going to be at potentially by the end of things. But either way, tell me what your thoughts are about this. Like, I know like some people are going to be like, I don't really care about like power level stuff, but it's like for the people that do, and you know, I like looking at the consistency, and like I said, it bridges areas of the story to where you can kind of see the line of where, like, okay, the power progression goes, because I do think that's important when you have when you have something as a goal that involves obviously a character that somebody has to overcome. So it's like it's good to see the pathway of events, or like where you have like these large gaps. Because, right, it's like when you look at it the same way too in the verse, this is something I'll close out on. When you look at something in the verse, say previously, you go to you could go back and kind of do that per area, but I think the easiest one to kind of look at right now, just because it's still relatively new, but it's old in the fairy tale world. Oh, hang on, my dogs are getting crazy now. Okay. My dogs have decided, other dogs across the street, we got to be wary on them. But right now, as I was saying, is the previous, you go to Alvarez, the Spriggan tier, because we know it's like a general area of power, and we have apparently from Mishima, that's the weakest one of them is Wall, even though funny enough Wall is my favorite in terms of just design and general existence. But then it goes all the way up to August, and obviously it's like right there's also Irene. And just from say the Wendy versus Nibaru fight, when Wendy buffed herself up with Irene's magic, she was only using, and then this is a percentage of human form Irene. So a single percent was able to dramatically put Wendy to where she could fight a Dragon Force buffed Nibaru. So Nibaru, who was already within Spriggan tier, Dragon Force buff gets way stronger. Obviously he progressed over what Wendy was doing at the time. But that just says like, okay, well, when you look at buff Nibaru, if Irene in her human form for directly from her is at least, because she says like, oh, you're not even using a percent, 1%. I would say like just kind of like roughly when you say in full 1%, but it's like if you just say 99, or I guess just straight, yeah, times 100 of what that level that she was already displaying is capable of, that's pretty big. But it's pretty big, especially when you compare it to the bottom. I would say like probably the weakest character in my eyes that's like Spriggan tier. And this is off my head. I'm sure if I looked at some areas, I could probably find like a better candidate. But I'd probably say Elfman, because Elfman, like, he has physical power. Well, he has power, but it's relatively just in direct physical attacks. He has defense, but his defense doesn't really have much for hacks resistance. He has hacks, but it's pretty much just tied to beasts and what I guess the Fairy Tail verse classifies as beasts for like certain areas, with like his sword of darkness, which I don't, apparently, and then Belfast and stuff. But that's probably like my best one to kind of go off of, because relatively also in Spriggan tier everybody has at least one hacks, and Elfman will just get completely ran over by somebody that's faster than him, as he consistently always does. But then obviously it's like when you look at the peak, it's like August. So when you look at August and you look at Elfman, there's a huge gap in there. So the same thing if you look at, say, I would say like my bar for Dragon God level, this is Dogremag, because Dogremag should be stronger than human form Selene, because it took Natsu and Suzaku combined in order to beat him. Obviously not counting Dogremag prior to getting his cores destroyed, because that's his whole cheat buff of being invincible. But once he goes to his dragon form, he's clearly stronger than either of them individually, but them combined were able to defeat him. So, Natsu, Suzaku, their powers fused is at that Dragon God level, and obviously they're climbing stronger since then, so it should be a different story probably with the next chunk of the arc or two, whenever we see a little bit higher Natsu stakes events happening. But that's the same thing of kind of what we're doing. Like I said, we have like low area for this higher end tier that we're kind of like forming in 100 Years Quest. But it's like when the peak is, when you say like the bottom area of these, it's like human form. I'm trying to think. Haku, actually, the best example. Haku, probably Haku or Wendy, as like the lowest people on that totem pole right now for it. Because like you'd say Urza, obviously. Well, no, Urza, because Urza should just generally be a chunk above Wendy from just experience and versus. Well, both of them are utility and versatility and hacks, but I'd say obviously Urza has the experience. Wendy, I still think could pull that out if she went tactical enough, but realistically, if you look at them and say that they're like the bottom, like Haku and Wendy, but then the top is the dragon gods at their full power, probably Igni at the top, that's a huge gap. But right now we're getting stuff that's like, okay, well, you have stuff like Natsu and Suzaku and Misaki, and then it's like, okay, Urza, but now we're getting some of the other people kind of going, okay, the Signario sisters. I would say them probably combined, and we never really saw them in a dual fight. Both of them fought individually, but I would say, because I still think that's going to be something that we're going to have to eventually see. I still think their dragon form is going to be fused when we get a full dragon form, but we'll see as well about that again. But from the concept, and I know I've been saying I was gonna wrap it, you know, this was my closing, it's been like 4 minutes, but I think it's something that's kind of important, because if you stay towards at this point, it's like the whole point across of what it's got value in is it's building that same bridge where it's saying, okay, well, that huge ceiling gap, I'm going to stake probably like a really good spot in between. Like I would say, like if you had like a graph and like Wendy and Haku are 1, the dragon gods and their full power 100, Wet's probably right now looking at like somewhere between like 60 to 70 if I had to guess. Like 63, probably a solid 63. But anyway, other than that though, tell me what your thoughts are about Wed and like how crazy this power jump really is, because it's when you really look at a lot of stuff, and then maybe that'll be a thing for like a stream at some point, or like a video as we'll go through like power level consistency to kind of like show where things go throughout every single general arc and where the jumps happen as the verse goes. But other than that, I'd like to hear what you guys have to say on this, and I'll talk to you guys later. Bye.